Alrighty. G'day gents, good to be here. I appreciate you taking the time to be interviewed. Now this is going on a DVD which will be made available to the PRA and to the ASRA in Australia. For the members, it's a non-profit thing, and there are a lot of guys who are interested in seeing you guys, seeing what you got to say, and learn a bit more about you other than what they know from you on the forums. So
we're delighted, Mitch, that you're interested enough to interview us.
Well, thanks, Chuck. I think you said in the email if you think people would be interested in my story, and I can tell you there are a lot of people who will be. So perhaps we'll start with you, Chuck, and you can tell us what year you got involved in gyroplanes.
Well, to the best of my recollection was 1968. I got married to wife number 3 in 1967, and I just barely started when we got married.
Okay. Married 3 times.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I've been married 3 times myself.
I have too.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Okay, so that was when you first built your first machine?
1967, I believe it was.
Right.
Or 1966.
And that was basically then an Igor Benson
It was
derivative?
strictly a stock Benson V8.
Right, okay. And did you do that on your own, Chuck, or did you do that with a friend?
The reason I got started, a fellow working for me by the name of Bob Carbonell came to me one time with a set of Benson plans and wanted to know if he could use the machine shop to build that thing. And I looked at the plans and I said, Bob, I guess you could, and I might even help you build it, but there's no way in the world you'd get me in something that looks like a lawn chair that flies. That's how I got started.
Okay. And I guess back in those days you were building your own blades as well.
Yeah, we started off with wooden blades, but I didn't build the first set of wooden blades that we used. A fellow named Danny Waters had a woodworking shop, and he used to build wooden blades, and we built him rotor heads. So we swapped back and forth. He built blades, and Bob built rotor heads.
Okay, and these blades were specific to use on gyros, or?
Yeah, they were Benson standard wooden blades, plywood skin blades.
Yep. Excellent. Alrighty, and now over the years, of course, there's been a fair bit of debate about the whole CLT, horizontal stab thing. When did you first start to move in that direction?
With horizontal stabilizers?
Firstly with horizontal stabilizers, and then changing the thrust line later.
Our first gyro was a stock Benson V8. I built a second one shortly after that to Benson V8 dimensions, but used a round tube, 2.5 inch 2024 instead of square 2x2 tube. And all my buddies that were flying said, oh, that Benson tail is just a rock guard, you don't need that, so I left it off. And I flew this thing and I was all over the sky. Right then and there I decided I needed the horizontal tail. And I just sawed one out of a big sheet of plywood and mounted underneath the vertical tail.
And you noticed a difference straight away?
1968.
Right. And that definitely helped. You could tell the difference straight up.
Made a huge difference.
Huge difference. Yep. Okay, so it was a pitch damper. It basically kept you flying pretty straight and level.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, and then the thrust line situation, that evolved.
Well, that came a number of years later. Nobody thought much about thrust lines because Benson thrust lines weren't all that bad, particularly if you used lightweight wheels. We always used wheelbarrow wheels down here because they were cheap and readily available. And a Benson with wheelbarrow wheels and a seat tank, pretty much centerline thrust, so nobody gave it much thought. Then I bought a truckload of old gyro junk. Ernie, in the meantime, had moved over to this side of the state from West Palm Beach.
That was about 1986.
1986. Bought a truckload of gyro junk, and included in that junk was an old Benson B7. Had a McCullough engine on it. And a Benson spindle head. stripped off the spindle head and the McCullough engine, and for some reason I had a Rotax 447 laying around, mounted that, and the logical way appeared to be to mount it upside down, spark plugs down, and everything's behind the seat that way. And I built a standard Benson offset gimbal head for it. And this thing was miserably unstable. Ernie flew it, I flew it, another friend named David Cease flew it, and we all knew it was horribly unstable. It was easy to fly because of the Benson offset rotor head, but with a throttle change, everything went in the wrong direction. With gusts, everything went in the wrong direction. That got me started thinking about airplanes. Airplanes don't behave this way. Why? And it turns out the main reason airplanes generally have the thrust line passing through the center of gravity. So that led to me looking farther into it. In those days, nobody had computers, or I didn't have a computer, and we couldn't look up Sierra's work or Sierra's patents or anything of that sort. So it's originated right here.
Right here with Ernie?
Reinvented right here.
Well, between the two of us, we were all working. To start off this old machine he's referred to, we call it Goober, and it was horrible. I was the heaviest person in it. It was almost out of CG with me, and David was the lightest person, and it was almost out of CG with him. But Chuck was the right size person, but it was just terribly unstable. Had it been a more powerful engine, it would have probably killed one of us. But the old 447 just didn't quite have enough power to flip you over.
But it's a ball to fire. Everybody enjoyed flying it.
It was.
Because of the Benson rotor head, you weren't entirely aware of all this.
Plus, at that time, in that particular time in the world, there's a red machine that's quite popular that had the same problem, and they were having some issues with people getting hurt or killed in them, and it was the same problem, high thrust line. Then Chuck built this thing. We were going to build, mostly his design, a jump takeoff gyro, and it had a seat where you lay down in the thing like in a Formula racing car, and it had you put the 3-blade on it first, or the 2-blade head? Had 2 different heads on it with collective pitch in it, but it still had the little 447, which just wasn't enough power. But it was the first of the drop keel designs, and it became pretty apparent. And then you come up with the first original tall tail. He was a little 12-inch cord tail, but his tall tail with no horizontal stabilize on it. That was to eliminate most of the torque problems and give you more rotor authority. And he tried to get me he flew the thing with a 2-blade rotor's head, collective pitch in it. He said it flew great. He says, "You go fly it." He says, "Now don't touch a collective." I had it set. Okay. I went out and flew the thing. I was flying along at about 5 feet, and it just went to full collective all on its own. And I did a flying jump, and I went up 50, 75 feet, out of control, at least from my point of view. I pointed the stick down and pulled the throttle back. It's still going up. I did everything I knew how to make it go down. But eventually reached the peak of its jump, and then it started coming down pretty fast. And then I knew what to do. I managed to land it. That was the last time I ever let him convince me not to put my hands on available controls.
So
that
what
was down at
Immokalee.
And what year was that again, gentlemen?
Probably 87.
All right. So let's go back to you, Ernie, and when you first got involved with gyros then.
I got out of the Army. I was a crew chief on a Huey helicopter in the Army, and I got out in 70. In 70, I had late 70, and I had a son on the way. He wasn't born yet. Didn't have a job, didn't have a place to live, and I was living with my mother. Finally got a job and got a place to live and paying for the baby to be born. On one Sunday, I seen an ad in the local paper that said they would feature new businesses, and it was a Benson gyrocopter business. I was mildly intrigued, so I went up to the place and befriended the guy, and he was not going to fly because he was working on, I knew something, CDI on the ignition or something. Waited several weeks to watch him fly, and when he finally did fly, he got up to about 1,000 feet and the engine locked up, which is pretty normal for a Mac, and he hadn't ever practiced power failure, so he came down and did a high flare, dropped through and went down and bent everything, and he got very disgusted with it, so he wanted to sell everything he had. I didn't have any money, but he's 10 cents on the dollar, so I went around and begged and borrowed and cajoled everyone I could for some money, bought his business, and took the stock and made enough parts to sell, to buy, to pay for everything. And then I read a book and taught myself how to fly along with the guy that bought the first unit from me. We literally read the book and towed behind cars and had some great adventures ducking under power lines and over cars and whatnot going down the highway.
That was Jerry Dicus.
Yeah, a guy named Jerry Dicus.
Lived over in West Palm Beach.
Ultimately we had 2 stock Bensons with a little putt-putt pre-rotator motor, and Jerry had found out about this club called Sun State Rotor Club. Found out there's actually other people in Florida. So we trot up to this place called Valkyria, and we get up there and there's a bunch of these old crusty looking guys, these really crusty looking gyros, and they got Hughes helicopter blades, and they got cable drive pre-rotators. They look like they've been dumped in a grease vat. They were just nasty. We had the best. We had the Benson until they went out to fly. They put us to shame at how well they flew. So we quickly evolved. I got tired of the McCulloch quitting. I had 42 in-flight shutdowns my first 50 hours of operation. In the beginning, if we could get the engine to start, I could get in the seat, get the little putt-putt pre-rotator to start, get everything working, get to at least 200 feet before the engine quit. It was a very successful day.
Things have changed then.
Indeed they have.
Yeah, the first time I landed, the engine was still running, almost scared me to death. I wasn't used to that.
Didn't know what all that noise was.
So let's talk about the development then of the Dominator, or the beginnings of the Dominator. You're involved with Chuck.
Right. When I moved over from the east coast of Florida to the Tampa area, I lived at Chuck's place in a trailer there, and we originally were going to get together, and he was going. I had a floor covering business for a number of years, and I was just burnt out in that. And he said, "Well, we can start building gyros." So started with this pile of junk that he bought and whittling this thing and that and the other, and he built this contraption, this jump takeoff gyro, but it was the first of the drop keel. It was the first of that idea. And at some point along the way, I acquired a 503 engine. A guy crashed and I bought his engine, and I decided, well, I will take his idea and make it a little bigger, more drop keel and bigger tail. And I built the first one. Well, there's several Benson types before that, but made the first true Dominator and put a horizontal stabilizer on it. Well, let me step that back a little further. I had built a 2-place side-by-side without a horizontal stabilizer, which my wife and I actually got married in at 300 feet. And then he kept telling me the virtues of having a tail on it, right on the thrust line, and how much better it'd be having the wings. So we attached wings to that aircraft, and it did, in fact, make it very stable. It already had the centerline thrust, but then I built the 503 model with everything I could glean from him and everyone else. Showed up at first fly-in and was almost laughed off the field because it was such a ridiculous looking machine.
And this is what year?
Probably 89.
Okay, so that's really the birth then of...
Well, that particular fly-in was in Okeechobee City, and Igor Benson was there, Ken Brock was there, Ed Trent was there, Chuck was there. And that one particular morning I was out flying, and what I would do to demonstrate the stability of it is I would move the stick lock to lock at any given speed at this rate. And all it would do is it would just follow my movement. And Chuck and Igor and Ken, I think Ed Trent, were all pulling up in a car at the same time. And as I was doing that, driving by, and Igor looked at that and said, "Take me back to the motel. I don't want to see someone die this morning." So he went back. I found out about this later. And they came back around noon, and I just happened to be doing it again, demonstrating it, because no one else at that time could do that and live. It would literally kill you. So Igor got out and watched it. Later on that day, he come over to the machine, and a few words. He just looked at it and said, "I approve." And at that point, God had spoken.
All right, so Rotor Flight Dynamics was born.
Well, Rotor Flight Dynamics, the initials for it's RFD Incorporated. And at the time, Chuck had a business called Radio Frequency Devices.
Aha.
And when I needed to buy stuff, I would use his tax number, and I get it under RFD. Well, he was phasing his business out, so I had to come up with a name that would fit RFD.
Yep.
And interesting, now he uses my tax number.
Oh, that's excellent. So how many models do you have today in the stable?
Basically, we have a single place open frame model and a single place with a pod and a windshield. The open frame model used to have a 503, but they've terminated making that engine. So now we put a 580 tail, and we call it a super white. It used to be called an ultra white. And then we have the pod and windshield and all the bells and whistles, like that's a performance model. It will fly faster than the other one without the body. The little body will actually give you almost 25 miles an hour better top speed. Then we have the two-place model that we've experimented with many different engines. A standard engine, if you want to spend the money, would be a 914 Rotax, but at $34,000 for the engine, few people are interested in that. Most recently, we've come up with an engine that called a Viking engine, and it's, I believe, the engine the gyro world's been waiting for. I built one machine with it and was so impressed I bought 3 more engines, and we have 3 gyros under construction in the shop right now for that.
Okay. Chuck, if we can come back to you for a minute, you post a lot of good information on the forums, on the American forum, the US forum, and you know, this is one of the reasons I wanted to meet you, is been instrumental in my learning curve, and there are a lot of fellas out there that appreciate the amount of information that you put out there, whether it agrees with some or not. We all know that there can be a lot of controversy on the forums. I was going to ask you a little bit about how you got involved in blade technology and how that tied in with Ernie and Ernie's Dragon Wing rotor blades. Can you talk to us about that for a minute?
Well, it's a long, indirect story, Mitch. I mentioned before the fellow was building wooden blades that were used by the group around Tampa. He'd seen a set of Benson factory wooden blades that had a concealed spar. The plans-built Benson rotor blades had an exposed steel spar. There was a slot on the lower surface, and the spar was attached with several hundred wood screws. Ernie's probably built them.
No, I never built a Benson blade.
Okay.
I'll add to that when you finish.
But this fellow had seen the factory blades concealed spar, but he didn't know what was inside of it. And what he was doing was simply screwing the steel spar to the plywood and then laying the bottom skin on the thing, expecting the glue to hold it. Well, it didn't. And we had several pop loose. Nobody got hurt. But once I saw how he had built those blades, I said, never again will I fly those wooden blades. So, not knowing any better, I took a writing pad and a pencil, and one guy had a set of Benson metal blades, serial number 1. I went out to the airport where he kept his machines, and I held my writing pad up next to the end of the blade and traced out the spar. And sent off and had an extrusion die made, and you can't buy just 2 or 3 spars. You have to buy a whole 500-pound ingot. So I had 500 pounds of copies of Benson rotor blade spars. And they flew about the same as Benson. There wasn't any difference. There couldn't have been much difference. They were identical in most respects. So I made them available to Sunset Rotor Club members just for the cost of materials. And after a while, a lot of people in Florida were flying copied Benson rotor blades.
They were a segmented blade? Were they a segmented blade like the Benson?
They were identical.
Right, yep.
Same number of rivets. As a matter of fact, Bob Carbonell, my first gyro partner, assisted me, and he pulled the tapered root blocks apart, and Benson had dowel pins, hollow dowel pins, roll pins, holding the 2 pieces together, but had an irregular pattern. And just one of those things, the drill jig was crooked, I guess, but Bob precisely duplicated the crooked pattern. So all of our homemade blades had Benson's crooked drill pattern to roll pin the filler block to the spar. But anyhow, they didn't fly all that bad. They flew just like Benson blades. They had segmented skins, and from later experiments I learned that most of the problem with Benson blades was not the rivets or the gaps. It was the gaps in the skins that allowed the blades to act like centrifugal air pumps, vacuum cleaners. When you choke off the vacuum cleaner, the motor speeds up. If you can seal the blades, you reduce the power consumption. So that was the first metal blade. And then I began flying Hughes blades and became interested in building bonded blades. My company was building some parts that had to be structurally bonded, and we had bonding facilities, so I started playing around with just grinding spars with a belt sander and bonding skins to them. I had a set of blades that were built around a nose spar that was 3/8 of an inch thick. It gave an airfoil thickness of, I think, around 8% of poured, real thin, skinny airfoil. They flew very well. They had bonded skins and a fairly decently shaped leading edge. And then I built blades with laminated birch spars that used the more modern helicopter type airfoil. And they were all improvements over Benson's original blades, or over Rotordyne or Stanzi or any of those early metal blades. The early metal blades were Stanzi and Rotordyne. They were patterned after Benson wood blades, but either they couldn't form the leading edge right, or common old wives' tale, the general belief that the more blunt the leading edge, the higher the lift. But that's all nonsense. You need a real airfoil, and it needs to have a real airfoil shape.
Okay, so that development then obviously got you interested somehow, Ernie.
Well, about 73, when I got tired of the Mack engines quitting, I decided I wanted an airplane engine. I had a friend that had just moved out of the area I was in, back to Louisiana, and his dad owned the town there, and he went to the airport and he found a box of old Continental parts, enough to build an engine or two, so I bought them for almost nothing. He sent them to me, and I had a little torch that I bought from a guy, taught myself how to weld, built an engine mount, put the old engine together, and tried to fly it on the Benson metal blades, and it was just horrible. Didn't have no performance. So I had got a hold of Chuck and asked him what I could do about it. He said I needed a bigger blade. I said, well, how can I build it? At that time I was living in a single wide mobile home, and I had a 17-foot long hallway. That was my workspace. So he told me a method that's similar to the Benson blade, whereas you take a metal spar and underneath a piece of white birch, and I was going to take it a little further. I was going to embed it in the birch and then glue and screw it, and then I was going to use urethane foam to fill the trailing edge, and I was going to wrap the whole thing in glass. And I did. And then I got to talking to him about it, and I told him how I did it, and he said, well, you got to have a reflex in it. I said, what is a reflex? So he explained it to me, and I figured out a way to do it in my little hallway, and I cobbled these things up, and they work great. You could literally throw them one time with one throw, and they would pick up and start spinning. They flew that old Continental around just great. I'd had over reflexed a little bit. It tended to get, you reach about 60 miles an hour as your top speed, then it would go vertical with any more power. But I showed up at a fly-in and everybody liked it, and other people wanted me to start building them that way, and it was just extremely time consuming. And I built 2 or 3 sets like that, and had a good friend of mine that built a copy machine. He's a fixed wing pilot, didn't need no training, didn't think he did, and he ended up killing himself in the machine, doing a PIO, showing off, and he would dive and climb up real hard and push over the top. But the third time he did it, it just did a forward somersault. And right after that happened is when I gave up on the business over there and moved over to Chuck. Come over, I think I built one more set over like that at your place, didn't I?
You did.
I did build one set, and everybody just loved them. But we found the downside to them is we left them in a van one time, sitting on a van that was on the dash and in the back, and they were bowed in the middle. They sat for a week in the sun, and we took them out, and they looked like pixies, the little pixie shoes. The tips were turned up. Leave them in the sun long enough, they'd straighten back out, but it was not the way you want to have a rotor blade. So I decided I would build one out of metal. So I took and this is after I left Chuck's place and had my own place, had an old milling machine. I took a piece of bar stock and set up in my mill, and I would take multiple cuts to shape it. But the other interesting story is no matter how hard I tried to change the airfoil, no matter how intentionally I tried to change it, it always came out the same. It's like my hands would not listen to my mind, and I kept coming up with the same airfoils, but I built the first metal ones. I built the airfoil, and then I flush riveted the skins on. It was real clean and fluid, and it just worked great. Then I tried to build another set with a different airfoil. It came out the exact same way, and I screwed the skins on that. And from my perspective, I designed the airfoil. And Chuck says there ain't no new airfoils. Everything that can be built's already been built. I said, well, fine. Tell me what I built. I reinvented. And he spent a number of weeks, if not months, researching the NASA and then the old NACA airfoil things. He found out that I'd built an airfoil that was used on a plane, I think, in 1932. And it was like a horrible airfoil. It killed the test pilot on the first flight, but that was in an airplane. And the reason for that is the airfoil has an abrupt, immediate stall. There's no warning. It gives tremendous amounts of lift right up to the point it stalls, and it's absolutely nothing but it's no airfoil, nothing at that point it stalls. But anyway, people kept wanting these blades, and it was very time consuming to build them one at a time, so Chuck said I need to get an extrusion made. And I didn't have the money to do that, so there's several people want the blades, and I told them if they would be willing to put up the money for possibly getting a set of blades, I would do my best to build them. And I got enough people to put enough money up so I could buy the extrusions, like you said, 500-pound billet. Well, fast forward to when I started, it was a 1,000-pound billet. And then I had to find the bonding agent, which he researched a bunch of different companies and got the bonding agent, which I've used for the last 22 years. It's literally the best in the world, except now it's become cost prohibitive. Got an extrusion made, and I started making blades, and we made a couple improvements on them as the years went on. About somewhere in around 90 to 100 units we changed and put a larger reflex on the blade, and we used to rivet the trailing edge, and then somewhere around 500 or 600 set we did away with rivets on the trailing edge, and we twist the blades. They have a 6-degree nonlinear twist in them from 0 to positive. We tip weight them in various weights for different sizes. Recently we come up with one we call a cruiser blade that's extremely heavily tip weighted for people who want to fly fast through turbulent air, and it's become quite an item for people that want to go fast in a gyro.
And that tip weight that you've got now in the cruiser blade, how much is that in each end of the blade?
It's approximately 3 pounds, but it's not quite. We measure the weight, the tip weights in inches. We machine the shape that it has to fit in the spar, and then we cut off so many inches of it. And we have a 4-inch, an 8-inch, and a 12-inch.
Okay.
And the 12-inch is the one that's the heaviest.
Brass plug.
Yeah, it's a brass plug.
So the Dragon Wing blades have effectively been in existence for 22 years or thereabouts and gone through major evolutions.
They went through 3 evolutions.
Three evolutions.
Yeah.
Yep.
The problem we've had recently, though, that little side note, that glue we started off 22 years ago, the glue company had a minimum order of 250 square feet and 2 gallons of the liquid portion, and the combined total was $875. I just bought my last that I'll ever buy from them, and it was $17,000 for the same order. That's too big of an increase for me to absorb. Luckily, other glue companies have come along, have sprung up since then, 3M being the best of the lot. We did some extensive testing with their product for about 6 months and then find it to be quite adequate for our needs, so we've switched over to the 3M,
Okay.
which is what I think my competitor is also using in his building process.
And you put a bend in the hub bar, coning angle into the hub bar?
It has approximately 3 degrees coning angle.
Yeah.
Just bend it.
And you bend that both sides outboard of centre?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Alrighty. I want to just go back to Chuck for a little bit if we can, and just ask Chuck about some of your experiences on the Rotary Forum. As I said, most of what I'm learning from you and Doug Riley and other people who are posting on there on a regular basis. Must stop at 30 minutes. We've been going 30 minutes, guys. Wow. We're getting there. I wanted to ask you about some of the newer machines, Chuck. We know there's been some controversy with some of the older high thrust line machines in the past, and there's been quite a few bun fights on the Rotary forums. But some of these new tandem bathtub machines have developed some of these side slip roll issues that are not new. They have come up in the past with the J2 and I think the Windrider perhaps. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think most of it is propeller torque. You need an airfoil surface within the propeller slipstream that produces the counter torque. Where you have horizontal stabilizer below the propeller slipstream. There's no counter torque. There's nothing to balance torque load. And when you slam the throttle open, the machine rolls up. I think it's more of that than it is slip roll coupling. Don't you, Ernie?
Yeah. I don't think it's any one major thing. I think it's about 3 or 4 little things that add up all at once. Typically, anything that ever happens like that's never one major event. Is sequential problems that add up to, you know, grand finale, and that's usually not.
It's hard to analyze them because usually there are no knowledgeable witnesses to have seen the accident.
Yeah,
lots of cover-up efforts go on.
A little bit disconcerting when you've got high-time CFIs though that are apparently turning these things sideways when they come into land and coming to grief.
Well, B.J. Schramm has, late B.J. Schramm, there's still a statement on the internet that he made that he said, don't look at the machine, look at the designer. The European designs that I'm familiar with, the only guy that's an aeronautical engineer is Aviomania in Cyprus.
Yep. Nicholas. Yes.
Others may be, I don't know. But I know he is for a fact. I know that a good many are not. They just cut and try like we did.
Yep.
And they all copy a Magni because Magni appears to work.
So some of the other machines that have come onto the market that initially people have sort of looked at, and we all do that. We kind of eyeball a machine and say, yeah, that's pretty close to CLT, or that's a high thrust line.
If you're going to get into the aerocopter, that appears to be in its own class.
Yep.
Chris Lang, the guy who acts as their consultant, has a PhD in physics from MIT, so he knows what he's doing.
It's a beautiful machine. I've had the opportunity to sit in it. And
the horizontal stabilizer is centered in the propeller slipstream as it should be.
Yep.
But always go back to B.J. Schramm. Don't look at the machine, look at the designer.
Right. Excellent. And another thing I wanted to ask you about, Ernie, we talked briefly about your new engine, the big engine for the two-place machine. I spoke to you briefly about that at Mentone, and you said you were really happy with it, although it did have a couple of little areas where you said it wasn't for the novice, wasn't going to be a machine for the novice.
I think that might have been a reference to putting that engine on a single-place machine. Any engine of greater than 100 horsepower on a single-place machine isn't for a novice. It's much like giving a young kid a 900cc mini bike or a 500 horsepower Corvette.
Yep.
It'll only do what you tell it, but it'll give you everything you ask for when you ask for it, and if you don't know what to do with it, then it can bite you.
Sure.
And I've seen a number of times when people get in machines too powerful for them, they go to full throttle, and more often than not, they get in a place they don't know how to get out of, and then it becomes ugly after that.
Okay. Now, with that machine, you're using redrives that you're getting from Neil Hinz?
No.
No?
No, the Viking machine comes with its own redrive. The Viking engine, yeah. It's a complete plug and play.
Oh, okay.
It's, like I say, it's what I, and I'm sure a lot of other people have been waiting for, for the whole time in gyros. I mean, back in the mid-70s, I can show you later on, I built a monstrosity with 150 horse Lycoming on it, and talking about torque, that was a beast.
Right.
And it was expensive, and you couldn't keep an air-cooled engine cool on the back end of the pusher. They were always running critically hot. But the Rotax, when they first come out, the 914 turbos were selling for like $12,500. And even then, that was an outrageous amount of money, but it was at least possible for most people. But now at almost $34,000, it's just absurd.
Yeah.
It's just almost insulting to say they want that much for something that, I mean, the silly engine's a blow-through turbo.
What sort of money?
Rotax is owned by Bombardier.
Well, they own the market, so they can charge anything they want.
They own the market. They know how to squeeze it.
What sort of money are we going to be looking at the Viking then? Complete package.
The two machines I have in the shop that are being built right now, One of them is going for 34 and the other one's going for 38. The 34 is open frame machine. The 38's the pod and the windshield and all the little amenities, extra little things, and that's a turnkey operation. I'm selling a complete aircraft for what a Rotax engine costs.
That's amazing, and very reasonably priced.
I think so.
Yep. Excellent. Okay, so the Neil Hintz redrives you're using on other engines.
Yes, I've got a, you saw it up there, a Yamaha engine I've experimented with. It's a 150 horse snowmobile engine, and it's also not for the novice. It's a very high performance engine. It's a little quirky, but I sent the engine to Neil. He kept it for 6 months and made an adapter to put one of his redrives on it, and it's worked out quite nicely. And then we had an issue of the engine not having enough mass to start to turn the propeller without shaking violently, so Neil and I and Dick DeGraw worked out a one-way clutch on the propeller so it starts with no load on it.
Okay.
But it didn't pan out. It's extremely difficult to plumb up and wire up because it has an onboard computer that needs information from things that don't exist on a gyro, like thumb warmers and knee warmers and butt warmers, things that you have on a snowmobile. And you have to trick the computer into giving it that information to get it to work.
Yep. A couple of the other people that I've interviewed that are involved with rotor blade technology or building machines, I've asked them about the two-blade rotor system that we've got, the hub bar two-blade system, and all of them in fact said that, you know, we need to move to something different. We need to get away from the teetering hub bar two-blade rotor system. Can you give me your thoughts on that, Chuck?
Well, in terms of simplicity, you can't beat a seesaw rotor system. No way of beating it. It's cheap, it's simple, it works. It's a little bit fussy as to vibration. On the heavier machines, you need more blade area. The tip speed a rotor runs at depends on its blade area. How many pounds per square foot of blade area do you have? Sierra have always shot for 35 pounds per square foot of blade area, which results in a tip speed of 400 feet per second. You hang a set of Ernie's blades on a 1,200 pound machine and you don't have enough blade area. The tip speed is so high it eats too much power dragging those blades through the air. You drag blades through the air at 600 feet per second, you eat some power. So on these really heavy machines, you almost need a 16-inch cord, but a 16-inch cord on a seesaw rotor would be tough to solve the vibration problems. The logical way, I suppose, is to go to a three-blade rotor system, and then you can get enough blade area without vibration. But then the other problems of ground resonance and stuff, you get away from the simplicity of the gyro.
Sure. You got similar thoughts on that, Ernie?
Yeah, well, with Chuck and I have done a lot of experimentation. We tried the simple solution that Benson tried once before, and that's take two seesaw hinge rotor systems and stack them 90 degrees each other. And I took a little further. I got all the rotor blades running on the same plane instead of one above the other. And it worked. There's a couple of little devices we had to come up with. There's a scissoring action that has to be dealt with, and I come up with a little rubber pad thing that would allow it to do that. But it worked great on the small light machines, like two places, but when we put it on a heavy two place, a friend of mine had a 1,200 pound monstrosity with a Mazda engine on it, and he flew it one time, and in less than 5 minutes he cracked two blades on the trailing edge because of the, what Chuck calls the bucking bar effect. When one blade's facing forward and the other one's sideways, the one that wants, normally blades do like this when they get sideways, but with that little thing there, it had so much mass it couldn't move back, so the blades themselves would flex. They cracked the trailing edge on them, so we decided that wasn't the way to go. And I have done some experimentation with Dick DeGraw, which used to come down in the winters, and we built a offset gimbal three-bladed system, had flap and drag hinges in it. And it worked reasonably well, but we built it with materials on hand, and it became a big, huge monstrosity. Weighed about 35 pounds for the rotor head. So never went much further than that. And then later on, Dick in particular has built a three-bladed system for jump takeoff that he and I had built a machine, and I have got one of his heads in there now that I'm going to build, someday going to build a tractor gyro that will have a zero roll takeoff but not jump. It'll just simply, then you start moving forward, it'll start going up. But it won't jump up and then fly away. Jump takeoffs, I spent a lot of time learning from Dick out on my property here, and he's the foremost authority in the world, literally, on jump takeoffs. And a jump takeoff is more difficult than flying a helicopter. I've got a commercial rating in helicopters, and I'd much rather fly a helicopter than try to do a jump takeoff. Your timing has to be perfect, or else when you reach the top of your jump, you're out of rotor speed, the next place you're going to be is in the ground.
All right. Talking about Dick, you were involved with Dick in a project called the Helifino.
Well, that was the project we worked on it for a couple of years, but we sold the whole project to an entity in Spain.
And he didn't take that any further, did he?
Oh no, yes he did.
Oh, he did?
Oh yeah. Dick has, right now he only has 2 jumping gyros. At one time he had 3 or 4. But he's quite involved with several different entities that are doing military takeoffs on that. I can't go any further than that, but it's, he's quite involved with 2 or 3 different entities.
Okay, so that actual jump takeoff machine that you guys built and then sold on, that is actually being further developed, is it?
Well,
by the
that
people
technology,
that bought
not that machine.
Right.
The technology, well, he had that prior to us building that machine.
Yeah.
He had it all started with his first gyro he called the gyro, which he won the jump takeoff contest with, 17, 18 years ago?
Probably longer ago than that.
But he built another one for his wife, and he built several 2-place models. And we built this one as a side-by-side. He built the rotor system, I built the airframe and body, and it was basically, the aerodynamics I was using was a chicken egg. Chicken egg, fat end going forward, is fairly aerodynamic on 158 miles an hour, so roughly based on that, I sculpted out a body and we flew the thing, and it was so clean that we couldn't get any air to the radiators. It would just follow the boundary layer around, it would go into holes where we had the radiators, and we never did get that quite worked out. Then we kind of lost interest in it. The whole point of it was for the paramilitary, meaning police departments, that wants an aerial asset of a helicopter, but most of them can't afford it. This would have done what a helicopter could do. It'd do 90% of the work for 10 or 15% of the cost. But neither one of us knew how to market it, so it just languished until someone came along and bought the whole project.
Okay. So, well, I think we're getting close to the end here, guys. I just want to say to Chuck, I know Chuck's a big fan of the home-built gyroplane, and but you only be the most successful producer of gyros anywhere in the world, I'd say.
I wouldn't say gyros, but I would say probably second best on rotor blades. Jim McCutcheon, when he was in business, produced, I believe, 2,700 sets, and we just surpassed 2,000.
Okay. Yep. And how many kits or gyros have you sold? Like you do a lot of pre-built stuff here, don't you?
In this shop, we went to 116 units that we built. We have probably sold bits and pieces to at least 3 times that many, and just plain plans to the purist that wants to build it themselves. I have no idea how many there are out there. As an example, 15 years ago we sold a set of plans to a guy up in the Utah area, and he decided to become a manufacturer. He produced like 6 or 8 of them right there off the plans and started selling them to people.
Okay, right. Well, there's some fellas down in Australia when you first started doing your drop keel machines, they started emulating what you were doing, and obviously it was the way to go. It's what I looked at 10 years ago when I first got involved. And just to finish off, Chuck, I want to ask you what advice you would give to somebody who's coming into the sport, wanting to learn to fly a gyro these days. What's the best bit of advice you'd give them?
That's a tough question, Mitch. For the CFIs that I know personally, I'd rather go by the Benson book.
Thank you.
Well, okay, you're one exception, Ernie. If I had to take lessons, I'd take them from you.
And I don't teach anymore. I survived 10 years of teaching, so I figured I'd quit while I was ahead.
Yep. The only other one that I shouldn't mention that.
So you're an advocate of the Benson.
It worked for me.
Worked for you? It worked for a lot of guys.
It did, and a lot of guys it didn't.
Yeah. They didn't follow the book though, did they?
Well, probably not.
You have to know how to read and write and comprehend what you read.
And be patient with yourself. Most people aren't patient.
Yeah.
You know, when I did the book thing, I went through. It took 3.5 months. You know, we started off exactly word for word. I had the book memorized. When something would happen that I was unfamiliar with, mentally my mind would turn to page 3, paragraph 4, what to do. You know, and if you can't do that, you can get in trouble. And learning to fly on a tow line requires a very good driver, because he's the one that's flying you. You're just a passenger.
Yeah.
If he speeds up or slows down, you go up or down.
When Bob Carbonell and I were learning on the tow line, it was strictly by the book. Bob would look at his watch and said, "We've been doing this 15 minutes. Benson says we've got to stop and rest." So bang, we stop and rest.
Yeah.
I did that also.
Okay.
But with the advent of a reasonably stable two-place machine, and we're starting to get more and more instructors, it is an avenue someone can pursue if they pursue it to its end. The problem with the majority of gyro pilots, and Chuck can probably concur on this, is there's a certain mentality that goes to gyros in general, and they're the type of person that they get 2 or 3 hours of training, and it's so simple they figure they can go ahead and teach themselves the rest of the way. And it happens more and more often, and what happens is they will get in the machine, they will fly, but they'll get in a place, they run out of ideas, altitude, and airspeed all about the same time, because they don't know what to do once they get there. And it's a fairly expensive sport now, say, compared to boating or motorcycling. People have a hard time swallowing, you know, $150 or $200 an hour for instruction when they think they can do it themselves.
That's a fair comment. There are going to be a lot of fellas who are going to be seeing this DVD, and ladies for that matter. We're getting more and more female pilots, both here in the US and in Australia. So is there anything either of you two gentlemen would like to say, leave a message with those people coming into it, and also with the blokes that have been around for a while who have been looking to hear from you guys? Anything else you'd like to mention?
I would say if it's from someone coming in new, the most amount of money you can spend on good instruction is the least amount of money you can spend to save your life. I don't know, you know, the quality of instructors or the machines you have down there, but some instruction is better than no instruction, and more instruction is better than less. If you can get stick time with somebody, because there's, you know, once upon a time there's some statistics on the self-training routine. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's like 1 in 10 succeeded, you know, and continued flying, and 3 in 10 died trying, and the rest just gave up. And it's something of that order. I don't know if those are exact numbers, but it is a good method if you're perseverance. You know, if you can discipline yourself. But I don't think many people can do that nowadays. We live in a world of instant gratification. I want to learn how to fly a gyro, and I want to do it yesterday.
Yeah, a friend of mine calls this generation the microwave generation. They want it right now.
Right.
Ernie Boyette, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Chuck Beaty, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen. Sorry to keep you so long, guys.